Marketer of the Day, episode 585. Write your book in a flash to create the paint by numbers big business card of your dreams. Apply structured creativity, grow your confidence, and land your ideal clients with Dan Janal.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We're chatting with Dan Janal, and he helps leaders build their brands with books. And Dan has written more than a dozen books, and his latest book is called Write Your Book in a Flash, the paint by numbers systems for writing the book of your dreams fast. And so yeah, if you want to listen to the original appearance from Dan, you can find that at marketeroftheday.com/225. And back on that one, Dan explained to us how to create an authority piece of content. For example, you call it 10 tips to save your marriage. You post it on your blog. You are on your website. You make a Facebook ad sending people to a lead page's landing page. You research that target audience, make a compelling headline, call to action, Facebook post. Use Canva to make some graphics. You boost the post and you repost it, and then test different headlines. So I really appreciated that it took something that might have seemed kind of artsy and not really sure how to get the lightning out of the bottle, but broke it down into manageable scientific steps. That way you can have these measurable, consistent results. And so I'm assuming that with this whole write your book in a flash concept, that we have something similar where some people in the past might have said, oh, writing a book takes 20 years and I have to be like Ernest Hemingway and go up to a cabin. But if we can write our book in a flash, that sounds like it's a lot more doable than wasting half our life killing ourselves making a book. So is that all on the right track, Dan? And by the way, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. That's a wonderful, wonderful way of introduction because I'm all about adding value. So the hell with my background. That's okay. The only background that matters is results. So yeah, here's the deal. I'm into systems. I believe in creating the easiest path. As a newspaper reporter or journalist, and we have to write the same stories over and over. Traffic accidents, obituaries, board meetings. They all follow a similar pattern. And once you realize what the pattern is, it's really easy. It's like filling in the blanks. So I've written 13 books, and my latest book is Write Your Book in a Flash. But the subtitle is really fascinating for systems people. It's called, let me get it out here so I get it correct. It's called the Paint by Numbers System to Write the Book of Your Dreams Fast. And by paint by numbers system, I mean, think back to when you're in third, fourth, fifth grade, when you graduated from finger painting and your mother got you the paint by numbers system. And you saw this outline, really. It was like a picture of a farm. There was a barn and there were cows and there was a sky and there was grass, but it was all white. And there were little outlines for the cow. And inside that outline for the cow was a number. It was like number 6, because 6 was brown. So we have brown cows. You take your number 6 pencil that was brown and you shade in all the cow. And there was a little white spot in there because cows have white spots. So that was 1. That was your white color. So you color in your white. And then you go to the sky and you say, oh, I think I'll do the dark blue sky and then a light blue sky. And some days you'd look at it and say, well, there's a lot to do and I don't feel really like working on that. I want to do something simple. So you might just do something simple instead. Well, that's my analogy for writing your book. Because if you have an outline, a really deep textured outline for your book, then you have the same outline that you have for your paint by numbers picture. And you can look at that outline every day and say, I'm kind of feeling kind of sluggish today. I just want to do something simple. I know I'll just get some fancy quotes from some famous people from brainyquote.com, and I'll just put those in front of the chapters of all my book, of all the chapters. And then another day you might say, I really have a lot of energy and I have all these great notes. Now I'm going to tackle that chapter that was really kind of daunting to me. And if you do that, then you will have your book done. Just like the paint by numbers picture, you can have a book done in a very short period of time if you have a really, really good outline.
I like that way of thinking a lot, that some days you'll be more excited than others, and so that even on those less excited days, you can still fill in the gaps here and there, and you don't necessarily have to get yourself super amped up, juiced up every single day in order to do it. You can always, you won't lose momentum, and I think that we've all experience that, right? If we try to write a book the old-fashioned way, or we write a book without a plan, then sometimes we might have 2 or 3 of those days when we're just not that interested in our book, and the next thing you know, it's hard to pick up speed again, right? It's hard to get the momentum. Next thing you know, you think, oh yeah, there was that book and I wrote 20 pages of it 6 months ago. I haven't looked at it. Now I feel really bad, but now what's the point in jumping back in? So I like this idea and this analogy here of the paint by numbers, so that way you can just fill in the pieces, and you won't, it's still interesting because like with the paint by numbers, you don't always know how it's going to fill in, but you have at least somewhat of that helpful guide to move you along. And so you have this write your book in a flash book and system. So I mean, what's different about it? Like, why do people need your system as opposed to just winging it?
Well, I think you just hit on it in your answer. It's that some days you feel good, and people lose momentum, and that's what happens to a lot of people. And that's why their books don't get written. So that's why I'm really advocating not only the outline, but there's more in the book than just how to create a great outline. I have a whole chapter in how to overcome the limiting beliefs that stop you from writing your book. Because let's face it, writing is the only profession in the world that has built-in excuses. It's like, oh, I have writer's block. I can't write today. Well, do you ever heard of ditch digger's block? No. The guys who go out and dig ditches have to dig ditches every single day, whether their back hurts or their leg hurts or they have a migraine. They're still digging ditches every single day. But somehow writers think they can take a day off and just like not do it because they're not in the mood. Well, I have a whole chapter that debunks a lot of those myths and use some NLP techniques, some other ideas that get people over that hump, because it's only human nature. It happens to all of us. I'm joking about the ditch diggers thing and the writer's block. It happens, but it doesn't need to happen. So in fact, I'd like to make a special offer to all of your listeners that if they go to my website, which is writeyourbookinaflash.com, they can download a free chapter from the book on how to overcome all the limiting beliefs. And believe me, I've heard all of them. And there are foolproof methods for overcoming all of those things to get your energy back up and get you over that hump so you can actually write your book.
Awesome. So that's writeyourbookinaflash.com to get that free chapter. And you're so right that there just seems to be no limit to the amount of excuses of, why I can't write my book. I'm not in a quiet space, or I need to clear my head, or I don't have time, or this and that. And it seems like there is some component of like a 4-minute mile sort of concept here of, that the whole, I'm sure you've heard that story, like 4-minute mile, no one could run a mile under 4 minutes. One guy did. And then next thing you know, that within the next year, tons and tons of other people did. And I remember like back in the article writing days, back when the way to get traffic was you'd write a 400-word article for like easy articles, and then you'd post it. And I remember I would make it my goal, my point, to limit my time in doing it. And I would make it my point to write this article as fast as possible. That way, first of all, it somehow was better when I did it quickly. And then also I'd have time in the day to write 10 or to just go back to other profit generating activities, so that way I could get the article knocked out in say 10-15 minutes and then call it a day. But I would have arguments with other people who they'd take 8 or 10 hours to write just a simple little article, and they said, well, it has to be perfect, and I have to have a first draft and revise and spell check. And so do you have any thoughts for someone out there who might be listening and who might first of all be like a perfectionist and a naysayer and saying, writing a book quickly, why the heck would I want to do that, and how is that even possible? What would you say to sort of that naysayer perfectionist like that?
Well, the naysayer perfectionists are never going to finish their book because it's never going to be good enough, because it's never going to be good enough. There's an old saying that says, good is good enough, and perfection is the enemy of done. And there are a lot of other sayings like that to help you get over the hump. But the truth of the matter is that those people really don't have confidence in what they are saying. And either A, they need to do more research so they feel more confident about their material. And let's face it, many of us has the imposter syndrome. Even the most successful people in the world have what's called the imposter syndrome, and I address that in my book as well. So you overcome it either by doing more research and becoming much smarter so you feel more confident about that, Or I have another section of the book where you can get what are called beta readers, which are your peer review process. So other people read your chapters or your book and tell you what they like, what they didn't like, what's missing, what could be made better. And that way, when you go and hit the print button or the publish button or the create space button or send it to your publisher button, you're confident that you know that you've done the best job possible and that other people agree with you. So that would be one tactic for getting over that syndrome that stops a lot of people from finishing their books.
Well, fantastic. And what I'm hearing from your answers there is that you can't do it 100% alone. Like, writing a book, we always think of as a solitary activity, and sometimes it is when we have to hunker down and get the thing done, but we need some of that outside support, whether it's in the form of, like you said, going out and doing the research or getting some of that mental help. I mean, mental help sounds bad, but there's got to be a better way of saying it. But like you said, like the NLP, the mindset stuff to overcome the imposter syndrome, and then those beta readers, so that way you can write towards what people are looking for or adjusting based on where people might get stuck, and that way you're not completely second guessing yourself. And I mean, some of that stuff is really scary, and I'll have to admit it probably took me about a decade. It probably took me from my early 20s up until my late 20s to finally come to that realization that sometimes we have that really low confidence, but then it manifests itself in all these different ways. And it's easy to say, oh no, my problem isn't low confidence. My problem is that I need to spell check more. I need to spend more time on this. And it's like, yeah, but when you went to the root cause, it's actually the confidence. It's just expressing itself in these kind of weird, unexpected ways. So that's a scary wake-up call in a number of ways. So that's really great, though. So you have that those beta readers, and then the help in your book about imposter syndrome. And so when it comes down to us making our book, like, what are the steps here? You mentioned that you make the outline, you overcome the limiting beliefs. So what sort of tasks are we doing here to write our book in a flash?
Okay. Well, I also think that there's another part of the process here, and that is to work with a coach. And I work with a lot of authors, and the coach sees things that you don't see. So, they help you with the imposter syndrome. They help you get over the humps. They also see what's missing that you should be putting in there. I remember working with one woman who wrote a book about improv for nurses and doctors, and she said that if you used improv techniques, you'll improve communications between doctors and nurses, and you'd have fewer problems. And I thought that's a great idea for a book. So she had an example dialogue there of a conversation gone bad. I mean, the nurse would say one thing and the doctor would fly off the handle and just be horrible. And she said, well, you can rectify the situation if you use this improv technique. And then she described the technique. But she didn't have a sample dialogue showing of a good interaction, what you could expect as a result of using this improv technique. And when I pointed that out to her, she said, oh, you're absolutely right. That'll make the book so much better. So you want to work with a book coach who can help you mentally get over those humps, as well as look at your manuscript and see how it could be made better. So you're right, no one writes a book alone anymore. We think it's a solitary process, and for the most part it is. But those are not the books that are so great. The books that are great have a team behind them. Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager and Who Moved My Cheese, and he's only sold like 62 million copies of books. Well, he's written 25 books. And I interviewed him for my book. And I said, why do you collaborate? All your books are with co-authors. And he said, because I get so much smarter when I work with somebody else. And I thought that was really powerful, that someone as well published as he is, someone as smart as he is still so humble to realize that he doesn't know it all, that other people have expertise and value that they can lend to a project that can make his book better and help the world become a better place. So it's nice to be humble and follow Ken Blanchard's role model because, hey, he's only sold 62 million copies of books. He knows something about writing books.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and that's a really good, like you said, that's a good reminder that even the people who are at the top of their game, the top of their field, even they need coaches. I mean, you hear about things like back when maybe Tiger Woods isn't the best example, but when Tiger Woods was that the number one golfer and super popular, he had all kinds of different coaches for all kinds of different areas, even for a hypnotist. And as you're explaining this whole thing where your coach or your team might catch things that you miss, I mean, it sounds like we're always going to have those holes in our thinking there. And even if we're the most well-versed number one expert in our field, we might even be trapped by that curse of knowledge, right? Where we know all these things and it's easy and it's simple for us, and we don't know how much to dumb things down, or we don't know how detailed to make things without that course correction, without that feedback from someone saying, well, I know that you think that like you're a PhD in physics or whatever, and I know that you think it's simple for you, but it needs to be even simpler. So that's really great that sometimes people notice things that even we don't.
Yeah, and you bring up another good point there, and that is that, how much information do you need to share? Because a lot of people go into it and they'll say, oh, I need to write the encyclopedia about my topic. Well, I have news for you. No one wants to read the encyclopedia about this topic. The purpose of the book, especially for an entrepreneur like you who's listening to this call, entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, speakers, thought leaders, the purpose of the book, it's a big business card. It's a way for your prospects to get to know, like, and trust you, so they want to do business with you. So if you figure out what their big problem is, they'll want to read the book. And frankly, that's the only reason why anyone will read a book or buy a book, is to solve a problem. So the first step is, what is my ideal client's problem? And I'm going to write 10 chapters that show that I can solve that problem, that I have solved that problem, that I have stories and examples from other clients I've worked with where I solved that problem. So when that person starts reading my book, when he gets on the plane in New York and he gets off the plane in Los Angeles, he's read the entire book, because it's thin. It's 120 pages. It's 20 to 25,000 words. It doesn't look intimidating. It's not 3 inches thick. It's maybe half an inch thick. So someone who gets your book will say, I can get through this. This looks like an interesting read. I wonder what he or she has to say that can help me. That's what your book needs to be about. So if you work with that single-minded purpose, how can they get to know, like, and trust me as their guide who can help them solve their problems, so they want to retain me at my very high but reasonable coaching or consulting fees, then they will want to hire me. That's the whole purpose of the book.
You make it sound so simple. So you say, I want to be a coach on this. Let me go all the way back and figure out who my ideal client is, then what problems are they experiencing, and how can I solve them. So then I make the book explaining their problems and how I can solve them. And that way the book relates to those people, and it's also not super long-winded. So that way you get the impact in there in a short book. And yeah, that makes total sense. And then so since we're making a short book, the next thing that has me curious is, so you say that you show people how to write their book in a flash, and so the book's already kind of a short length, they can read it in one plane ride, but what exactly makes it a book that they write in a flash? Is it that thing that you mentioned before of filling in the parts of the outline as you feel like it? Is it like, is there a time management aspect? Do you speak it out, transcribe it? What makes this a book that we write in a flash?
Great question. There are two ways to answer that. First, you can write it, you can transcribe it, you can take your blog posts that you've already written over the last year or 2 years and reformat them so that becomes a book. You don't have to create any new content in that case. Or you might have new transitions or new introductions, or bring some things that are 2 years old up to date, and you have your book. You might be speaking a lot. You might have done a lot of webinars and podcasts. You have transcripts for those events. Why not take those transcripts and turn those into a book? Again, you have all the material you need there, and you didn't even realize it was right underneath your nose. There's another kind of book that's more of a quote book. And you could take some ideas and quotes you have. You might have had tweets. You might have had a series where you sent out maybe 50 or 100 tweets on how to do your job better. Well, take all those tips, put them into a book, put some lines in the book so people can write their own thoughts and ideas, like a daily devotional, and you have a book. So let's get away from the idea that your book has to be 300 pages long and weigh 5 pounds. Instead, your book could be as simple as quotes. It could be repurposed, recycled material that you've already written. It could be a lot of things. Let me tell you one other quick story. I was at a seminar a few weeks ago, and the keynote speaker was a great customer service speaker. I mean, he was funny. He probably gets paid super big bucks. He was at the top of his game. He consults with lots of great companies, and he gave us all copies of his book before we entered into the room. And I looked at this book, and it was small. It was really, really small. So at the end, he asked for questions, and I said, well, thank you so much. I learned a lot from your speech, and I love your book. It's very wonderful, but it's also very thin, and it's very small. And there may be only like 68 pages. And I said, is this the future of business books? And he said, it most definitely is. I said, how so? He said, well, I wrote this book for frontline service professionals, the people who wait on you at tables, and the hotel clerks and people like that. They don't want to read about the history of customer service. They don't want to know about the psychology of social proof and all that stuff. They just want to know what to do in a nice, easy format. So I have inspiring quotes, I have short stories, I have pictures, I have cartoons. I have something that's going to engage them and change them in 68 pages. And that's what he said to me. So my message to you is, think about the purpose of your book. What do you actually want it to do? And then format it so that it meets that purpose. And then you will have written your book in a flash. It doesn't have to be an encyclopedia.
I love it. Yeah, and as you're explaining that, I mean, it makes total sense that the people that we want to reach probably are busy, right? I mean, who wants to reach someone that has tons and tons of free time? I mean, maybe retirees, but if we're looking to reach someone who runs a big business or is looking to quit their job or change their profession or manage a family or whatever it is, I mean, you always hear nowadays everyone's super busy with juggling all the different things that are important and taking the kids to soccer practice and playing with all the apps on the phone and binge watching Netflix. And you always hear about how information is more condensed now, right? Like on Twitter and things like that. So that makes total sense that we would want to get right to the point and say more with less and not necessarily have to, like he said, write the whole encyclopedia. So that makes a lot of sense there. And one thing that I'm always curious when I have writers on, or I have people who are good at cranking out the content fast, are some of the mind tricks, because sometimes, as you know, it just takes one quick tip to really change the way that we write. And I mean, to give you an example, someone once told me, if you're worried about your editing, just read your pages aloud, and then you'll find the trouble spots. You'll figure out how to write in more of an active voice. Or something I came across more recently was someone said, if you're writing your book, format the page size first. Make the page in those sort of smallish 6x9 pages, because a lot of people open up a Word document and they write in a full size 8.5 by 11, and they write 10 pages and they're like, it's only 10 pages. But this guy said to shrink your page sizes first. That way you've written 30 pages, which will actually be 30 pages in your book. So do you have anything along those lines, or does anything come to mind as far as kind of game-changing tips that you've come across or used to really just revolutionize the way that we write our stuff?
Well, I love those examples. I have similar examples like that in my book, and many, many more. But what I'd like to share with you is, I am here to tell you that you do not need to write your book from beginning to end. I think that stops a lot of people, because the first chapter is really, really hard to write, or you might have chapter 5 being really hard to write because it's something you don't know that much about, so it scares you. Well, I'm here to let you know that if you have a deep outline, well, by a deep outline, I mean we have chapter 4, and we have 10 stories or 10 elements in chapter 4. And today I feel like writing about part 3 in chapter 4, because it's easier, because I'm inspired. And that way you can get through the book, because we all have biorhythms. And some days we're just more excited and more interested, and some days we're less so. So follow your biorhythms and attack the parts of your outline as you see fit. So I think that's probably one of the biggest mindset things that can change people. And also, just the idea of the numbers game, because you mentioned some visual techniques, which I think are great, and some people are visual, other people are more numbers oriented. So here's what I say. Let's say your book is 25,000 words long, and you have 10 chapters. Why 10? Because it's a nice divisible number. You could always have a few more, a few less, but let's just stick with 10 because it's easy. And everything is nicely divisible by 10 too. So if we have 10 chapters and we want 25,000 words for the book, that's 2,500 words per chapter. Now you know how long your chapter needs to be. So every chapter is 2,500 words long. So as you said, you set your little tomato clock, or you call it the Pomodoro, your kitchen timer for 15 minutes or half an hour. I was a former newspaper reporter, so I can write fast. You sound like you can write fast. I think we follow that Roger Bannister example, and we can all write fast. We can all run fast if we just put a deadline to it. So if we say, I'm going to write 1,000 words today, and I'm going to set my timer for 30 minutes. And at the end of 30 minutes, bingo, the thing goes off, and maybe you have a little bit more energy and a few more ideas, and you finish it. It's like doing sit-ups. It's hard to do 100 sit-ups, but if you do the first one, that's the hardest one. Because if you do the first one, you can do the second one, and then the third one, and then the fourth one. I'm up to 30. I don't know if I'll ever get past 30. But I can do it. But that first one is always the hardest. So if you just look at play this as a numbers game and say, I'm going to write 500 words a day or 1,000 words a day, just do the math, and you'll figure out that you'll be able to write a book in less than 90 days. And again, if you're using pre-existing content like your blogs and your speeches and your transcripts, you can probably do it in a weekend. I have seen it done. And if you can't do it, if you don't have those skills, that's why they have ghostwriters and that's why they have editors. And you can hire those people to do it for you. Because let's face it, some people on this call make tens of thousands of dollars per minute because they're selling real estate or bonds or something in the stock market. It's not worth their time to sit down and spend 40 or 50 or 100 hours writing a book. Well, there are people who love writing books and editing books who will do it for you for a very reasonable fee. And the return on your investment will be outstanding because if you get one client, look at the value of one client. If it's $6,000 or $8,000 or $10,000, you're going to make your money back probably on the first client or the second client. And then you have that book forever. So it's really an investment in yourself.
That's awesome. And so what I'm hearing from our conversation today is that people have a lot more options when it comes to writing their book than they previously thought. They don't have to start from scratch. There's all these places where you can use the raw materials like your blog posts. You can grab quotes and use those. And we don't always necessarily have to write it in order. We can go and jump around and move with our biorhythms. We can use some of those mental tricks like set a timer, or we can do the numbers game like how you hear about how Ernest Hemingway wrote only 500 words a day and just woke up, wrote 500 words, and then put it aside and had the rest of the day to himself. And then you hear about how Stephen King writes something like 2,000 words a day. And I mean, you look at some of the stuff he cranks out. He cranks out 700 plus page books there, and I mean, he doesn't even remember the 80s. He was doing cocaine the whole time. So if he can do it, I mean, there's a lot of hope for the rest of us. And with the Stephen King thing, how he'd write 2,000 words, and even if he wrote and maybe 1,000 words in, he was at the end of a book, he'd say the end and say, well, I've got 1,200 words to go, and then he'd go and start another book or pick up the rest of a different book, but just met that quota of 2,000 words to get the habit, get the momentum, play the mental game. I mean, there's a lot to be said about just being serious about this book, that if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably always wanted to write, but you let all these silly, tiny, insignificant obstacles get in your way. And it might even been the obstacle of time, like Dan said, where, money's the opposite of time. You might have not a lot of money to write a book, so then you put in the time. But if you have not a lot of time and a lot of money, then you'd be surprised at how cheap and easy it is to get this team going where they can ghostwrite the book for you, or edit the raw materials of your book for you, or review your book, or all these different things. So yeah, I'm just hearing that we have a lot more possibilities creating our book than we did even a few years ago. So I don't know about all of you listening in podcast land, but I'm pretty blown away by some of the amazing things that are possible with writing our books if we just set our mind to it. So Dan, if people really enjoyed our conversation here talking about writing our book in a flash, where and should they go check out on the web, and what should they do when they get there?
Okay, thank you very much. I believe in branding, so this is a great branding tip for everyone here. The name of my book is Write Your Book in a Flash. So, of course, the name of my website is Write Your Book in a Flash. And if you go there, you'll read all about my services where I can help you as coaching or editing. And you'll also see lots of free resources. And there'll also be a little pop-up box that will say, do you want to download my free chapter from my book on how to overcome the limiting beliefs that stop you from writing? So download that, you'll read that, and you'll say, oh yeah, now I get it. Now this exercise helped me get over that fear I had or that concern I had. Now I feel better about writing my book, so I'm going to hire Dan to work with me or whatever, We'll have a conversation, and if it's a good fit for us, then we'll work together. And if it isn't, believe me, I'll be the first person to say it isn't, because, if you go to Nordstrom's and you buy shoes, and if it doesn't fit well, they're not going to fit any better 2 weeks later. So no one wants a bad relationship. So if it looks like it's going to work out, I'd love to chat with you and see if we can work together. You can also buy my book, which is all of maybe $2.99 on Amazon Kindle. So I'm sure everyone can afford that. And you'll learn a lot of techniques for lots of things on how to write, how to edit, how to get your book published properly. Lots of great detail, lots of great information in there, all in one place, all for less than $5. So if you want the print copy, it's like $19.95, whatever. So you can find those on Amazon too. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to learning more about everyone who's listening and how I can help you write the book of your dreams fast.
Heck yeah, well, what a deal there. So go to writeyourbookinaflash.com, and like Dan said, that pop-up will appear so you can get that free chapter, and you can also get the book from that website if you want the Kindle version, so that way you don't even have to wait. Just read it on your phone, read it on your iPad, start reading it today, fly through it today. Or if you want the print version, you can get it as well. And just what really sticks out in my mind is that it took the human race like tens of thousands of years to invent fire, right? Humans have been around for 100,000 years. It took us until 10,000 BC to invent fire. It took us until 5,000 BC just to invent the wheel. I mean, imagine having to start from scratch. But then you were born and you went to school. You learned about the wheel and fire and 2 + 2 and how to read and write. So you benefited from people who have already walked the path before you. So why try writing your book, and why try figuring it out through trial and error? That sounds ridiculous. Instead, get Dan's book, figure out the system, so that way you can get the help from someone who's already done it before you, who will do it many, many times through his career. And so that way it doesn't have to be as tough, and you can get that very important coaching to help you get to where you need to go. That way you can overcome all of your own blocks, and we all have them. They might be time management, they might be confidence, they might just be with what needs to be in the book. But either way, get the help you need right away while it's still fresh on your mind. That's writeyourbookinaflash.com, and we'll see you there. And thanks so much, Dan, for enlightening us on what we need to know to write the book of our dreams in a flash. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Please subscribe, rate, and review our show at marketeroftheday.com/iTunes, and like us on Facebook at marketeroftheday.com/Facebook.